Hello and welcome to another video, and today we'll be looking at the Sharingan. The Sharingan is a 17-second cooldown ninjutsu, and it has 0 power and 0 range. This is what we call a passive ninjutsu, because once you activate it, it is something that happens automatically. It gives you a buff of some sort, it does something. So, this one specifically, what Sharingan does, is simply allow you to substitute automatically. So if anything hits you when you have Sharingan on, it immediately substitutes you. Whether that's for the good or bad, depends on the situation that you're in. However, there is one important thing. This passive ninjutsu can actually turn into a utility ninjutsu, and I'll show you exactly why in just a second. Because it does substitution, we're gonna have to actually look at all the substitutions in the game right now, so technically this would also count as a substitution showcase. So let's go ahead and see what we have. First up, we have the normal substitution, and normal substitution doesn't really do anything other than allowing you to escape, obviously. And the issue with the normal substitution is the fact that you don't get as much health as you technically should do compared to other substitutions. But that's the downside. The pro side is that you actually have it for 20 seconds instead of 25 seconds, which, believe it or not, makes quite the difference and allows you to escape things much faster, however at a cost. Shadow Clone Jutsu is essentially the same exact thing, however this time you actually get a mild temporary defense buff upon using it, and not only that, but it leaves behind a clone where someone might think that that's still you, so it gives you just a little bit of enough time to run away. And not only this, but because it's a 25-second cooldown substitution, it actually gives you a little bit more health in comparison to the normal substitution. Ink Clone is a very good substitution. Essentially, you just substitute and it leaves a clone that eventually then explodes into a pile of ink. And once that ink hits someone, on the middle of their screen there will be a huge black ink dot. And because of that, they can't actually see directly in front of them. So they can lock onto you, however, they cannot actually see what you're doing. So you could avoid their ninjutsus and you could actually close the distance and start comboing them again, or you could completely run away and hide and heal. Running style Shadow Clone Jutsu essentially does the same thing as Shadow Clone Jutsu, however without the defense buff, and instead goes ahead and lowers the attack power of the enemy that has been hit. However, this one actually paralyzes with electricity and goes ahead and stuns them for a very split temporary second, which you could technically follow up with some sort of a ninja tool, ninjutsu, or an attack. With Clone Jutsu, simply just decreases the movement speed of the attacking enemy. It says it right there, and it does exactly as it says. High speed movement doesn't actually leave a substitution behind, and instead just immediately teleports you further away from the person as if you have substituted. And it simply gives you a temporary increase in movement speed, which could allow you to dodge, move faster, and kind of catch up to your enemies much better. Sand Clone is personally one of my favorites because it has what I feel like is a bigger hitbox, and because it has a bigger hitbox, it also actually has a second mechanic, which is paralyzing the enemy for a decently long enough time for you to actually catch up, do your combos, use your ninjutsu, use your ninja tool, whatever you need to. It essentially gives you just enough time to do whatever you want. Clay Clone Jutsu simply just explodes, dealing damage. There isn't anything too special about it. However, what I do think is special is Water Clone Jutsu is one of my favorites as well, because it simply lowers the target's defense really well. It actually does lower its defense to a high level rather than something that's medium or lower kind of levels of, defense. Similar if not the same to Shadow Stitching. Bird Clone Jutsu simply just lowers the target's attack and defense by a mild amount. It's not exactly as high, but it's an okay amount. It's not necessarily too great, and it's not exactly bad. Paper Clone Jutsu is quite simple in that it literally just disables the use of their ninjutsu, and that's it for a temporary amount of time, roughly around 7 seconds to maybe 8. Snake Clone is another one of my favorites because it's quite simple and that it literally just poisons the enemy along with the actual substitution's damage. So because of this poison, you're gonna constantly be fighting and the enemy might actually be low on HP and so might you be. And because of that slight difference, you might actually be able to kill them with the poison without having to actually sacrifice your health. Stone Clone Jutsu simply gives you an increased movement speed upon escaping, and if any enemy hits your clone, they have a reduced guard. So essentially what happens is instead of taking a couple of hits and their guard still being up, they'll take a couple of hits and immediately have their guard broken. Crystal Ice Mirror Clone Jutsu simply freezes the enemy in place just like Icicle Swallow and extended the Ninjutsu and Substitution cooldown time. Swift Step simply allows you to have a better version of high speed movement, allowing you to have increased movement speed and attack tracking ability and evasion range, allowing you to dodge more. Multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu is now where we talk about how broken this stuff gets, because Multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu essentially summons 3 substitutions and they go forwards and basically just jam someone's lock-on because there's 3 different targets coming towards them, which is quite annoying. Not only this, but actually you have 2 substitutions as a reserve, so 1 and then 2 and then you're out. However, the thing is, if you play it safe, the first substitution, if you substitute, you'll have roughly around 10 seconds of breathing room because of how much time it gives you. That means you're kind of half the time that it requires for the cooldown, which means that the second substitution that you do will also gives you another 10 seconds, and then you'll have your third substitution, and we're not even going to talk about Sharingan on top of that, or any other ninja tool, or any sort of ultimate, because then it gets even more chaotic, and not in a nice way. Shadow Clone Explosion is the one substitution that turns this from going from a passive ninjutsu to a utility ninjutsu, because Shadow Clone Explosion has quite a wide explosion radius. Not only that, but it kind of slightly moves towards enemies automatically, and once it explodes, it breaks Sand Shield, Water Pillar, and Susanoo armor, and any sort of hyper armor that anyone had, and is essentially quite devastating because you get to use it twice in a row, if not possibly 3 times with other things. And if you have an ultimate, which is Shishui's ultimate from his DLC, then you'll basically have an unlimited amount of explosions. Time Space Hop simply goes ahead and reduces your ninjutsu cooldown times, but it also allows you to be invulnerable for around about 4 seconds, and when it runs out, it's pretty much over. So it's quite a very short beneficial buff. And not only that, but actually in that invulnerability, you can get pulled in and attacked by Heavenly Hand Power, Flame Lightning, and any kind of space related stuff. So any sort of space-time kind of things might actually affect you, or might not, depends. Emergency Exit is quite good because it essentially just heals you and removes status ailments. Status ailments as in, for example, you get hit with Amaterasu. All you really need to remove Amaterasu is simply to get hit once by something weak, and then once you substitute, you'll actually start recovering health slowly, like as if a healer is healing you, and you'll also have Amaterasu completely removed. Baron Breakthrough is quite simply a attack rather than an actual substitution. So the moment you use it, you substitute and you immediately dash all the way forwards and actually hit your enemy, and then you bounce off. And it reduces their secret technique when they get hit, and however, here's the downside: they could counter it completely if they know you're using it, such as using a ninjutsu to prevent you and remove your hyper armor, or some other way. So it's quite double-sided. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So it's quite good in terms of damage. It's really good, but again, you could get trapped and killed instantly if you fall for that kind of thing. This is basically the same thing as Time Space Hop. Essentially, once you get hit, whatever vertical level you're on. Let's say, for example, you're high in the air. If you get hit, you can substitute, and then you'll still be at that same height level. And the only issue is, because it's like time space up, flame lightning, heavenly hand power, that can still grab you, pull you away, and even universal pull, stuff like that for both of them. So it's a bit of a disadvantage, but it is what it is. And you don't even get a beneficial effect for this. You just emerge out the other side. And even when you're emerging, it's actually quite predictable, to the point where people can actually still hunt you down, hit you, and then you substituted for essentially no reason because someone just kept charge attacking and caught up to you. So it's quite iffy, and it's quite a difficult one to use, but if you're going to use it, then make sure to use it wisely. Technically, you could bait someone into attacking you when you use some sort of a ninjutsu to counter that, but hey, that's pretty much it, and that's pretty much all the uses that I could think of to actually using it and actually making it work. And Ninetales Raiment, which is quite strong as well, and essentially just gives you hyper armor. So you get hyper armor for roughly maybe 8 to 9, maybe even 10 seconds, and it gives you just hyper armor. That's pretty much it. So anything that you do will now have hyper armor temporarily, and it is quite useful, especially when you need to exchange, especially when something is kind of bullying you and they don't have hyper armor. So, it allows you to go ahead and exchange blows and actually turn the tide of battle. So, it's something to consider having. You can't hold this ninjutsu since it's a passive ninjutsu, and you have to press it. So, once it's activated, your Sharingan will be there and a red glow will happen. That red glow is only visible to you, letting you know how long it's lasting. And once it ends, it ends. So, the thing is that the only way an enemy would really know is if you throw a kunai or a weak attack, or if they bait you into substituting. So the thing is, Sharingan can avoid ninjutsus that say that they can disable substitution. So it's good for that, so you can dodge things that normally you would not be able to dodge. However, that also means the opposite is true, and you can't disable them. The only real weakness is forcing you out of the position that you're currently in, but if you're using Sharingan, you're kind of accepting that already in the first place. Technically, an enemy could hit you with a weak kunai to force you out of a good position to a bad position, but the chances that happens is far less likely, and you're far more in advantage regardless. The good thing about Sharingan is that when you're locked on and you're using it, you still stay locked on to the same target and you can attack. For the sake of the video, I'm going to use Water Clone so that then I can kind of, have my advantage and not exactly be toxic, and just kind of lower the defense of people so it can be easier to kill them. And for the sake of this starting part, I just wanted to try and showcase as much as possible the substitution while kind of risking myself and dying. But in exchange, I got both of the people, so it's 2 separate people who fell for a clone. So you can see that you can definitely force some tactics onto the enemy without having to actually try too hard. However, the next part is obviously if you have ninjutsus, then the ninjutsus you have in place will obviously help you out far more than what I'm using, because what I'm using is very rudimentary, basic stuff, and because of that, I'm not able to fully utilize the power of the Sharingan and the advantages that I could have given myself this match. With Sharingan, the secret is to pretend that you're actually not using Sharingan. So what you want to do is essentially allow yourself to be hit and sometimes substitute normally, and sometimes you want to substitute using Sharingan. So you want to kind of force this idea of, oh, does he have it on or not? And then that way they may waste a, disable substitution ninjutsu, and you might be able to get away with it. However, obviously that's not always the case, but most likely what is the case is that you manage to substitute and they get tricked into still hitting your clone, and then the clone explodes in their face, and they have whatever debuff that you've decided. So the main thing is to take away from all this is get hit slightly more than you think, and always manage your health and make sure you don't accidentally kill yourself. And that's pretty much it. That's how you kind of land Sharingan most of the time. And not only that, but you want to be careful with Sharingan. You want to make sure that the only times you use it is when it actually matters. Like, for example, if you're going to go into action, I would suggest using your normal substitution first and then your Sharingan. That way you kind of have a backup plan, and you have a third backup plan coming in because you're already substituted and you're ready for a third escape. Otherwise, you only have 2 escapes and you're kind of locked out. So that's the bonus, and you have to know when to use it. So not only that, but let's say for example you've got a spam scroll. This is where Sharingan really shows its value, because you'll see in just a second how fucking fast I'm going to be substituting every second. So already that guy got hit, and then again I substituted, and then I substituted again, and then I substituted again. That's like maybe 5 substitutions in roughly a few seconds. That's like 6, 7-ish, around about 8 now, I think. No, but whatever. You could see how extremely quickly I was substituting, right? Now, imagine all those substitutions were Shadow Clone Explosion. The amount of damage I would have done would have definitely lowered his health bar to at least half, if not slightly more, just purely because of the fact that I was able to keep using Sharingan over and over again. And this lobby was actually filled with just a bunch of attackers, and everyone's kind of just using meta weapons because they're used to other people using meta weapons, and so everyone's just kind of traumatizing each other, and they're just trying to deal with it, which is a bit stupid because there's no creativity, and it's just kind of the same combos over and over again. But it is what it is. I mean, there's really nothing anyone can do when the player base is so traumatized, and I think that's the main issue, because the entire player base is definitely 100% traumatized, and that's the reason why they keep using meta weapons and they don't try anything else. And also mainly because a lot of the people have ego, and because of that ego they end up destroying the game, unfortunately. So anyway, that's pretty much all I can really say for Sharingan. Other than that, there are a lot of weapons nowadays where it just does not build substitution for the amount of damage it did. For example, I was on full health, and I literally now I'm on 1 HP purely because that person decided to use that one weapon. However, of course, I managed to succeed and killed her, so that was quite lucky of me. Or, I don't know, skillful. So, yeah, there's options, but those options definitely require you to have some creativity to kind of beat that level of damage. And that's where the main problem is, really. I don't mind coming in 3rd, 2nd, or 1st, because honestly, if I can make it up to 3rd using only Sharingan, that proves to you how damn broken that shit is. Against, by the way, a full lobby of attackers who have only used meta weapons. Pretty strong, in my opinion, if I can still keep up and actually beat 2 other people. So anyway, that's the video. This has gone on for long enough, so see you in the next time.